This is Chuck Drawbaugh with College Funding Associates, and I'd like to welcome everyone onto our web meeting that covers the secrets to save time and money and reduce stress when it comes to paying for college. Not just paying for college as far as stress goes, but identifying schools, the right fit schools, applying, getting in, test prep, college admission applications, financial aid, the whole works can be a little bit overwhelming, and we're going to try to help save some time and money and reduce the stress and get you going down a good path for college. One thing to understand is it is legally possible to rearrange your financial situation in advance of going through the college process in order to help you pay as little out of pocket as possible. You may have read headlines in the newspapers over the years that talk about reasons why college is so expensive, the problem with student loans and debt, how long it's taking kids to graduate, etc. These are all things that I'm sure people are hearing about once they start focusing in on college. We're not going to spend a lot of time talking about headlines. As I said, my name is Chuck Drawbaugh. Our company is College Funding Associates, and we're located in Rumson, New Jersey. I'm not going to say much more about myself because this whole program is about getting you good content to help you be better prepared to get through the college process. One of the things we'd like to help families do is avoid finding themselves looking like this old gentleman here. Just a little bit of humor to start off a conversation that's really quite serious. So the question might be, why are you participating in this in the first place? You may be looking to find out more about financial aid and how it works. One of the things that everyone should understand is that one of the easiest ways to pay less for college actually has nothing to do with financial aid. And we'll talk about why that is in a second, but financial aid is just part of the process. Understanding financial aid is not a plan to pay for college. We also want to make sure that people are aware that less than 50% of students graduate from the school they start at as a freshman. Barely 33% of students are achieving an undergraduate degree in 4 years, and 10% of students attend 3 or more colleges before earning a degree. Now, these statistics are quite scary, and these statistics lend to the fact that people are overpaying for college. If a family's out-of-pocket cost is $30,000 a year and their student ends up taking just one extra semester to graduate, then they've overpaid by $15,000. If they're supposed to be going for a 4-year degree and it takes them 4.5 years, that's not a good solution or situation where you're paying for that extra semester. Now, there are a lot of things that might explain why you're paying for an extra semester. Maybe we didn't do a good enough job up front trying to get them to the right fit school, and their grades suffered because they weren't happy and they struggled through it, and it took extra time. Maybe they needed an extra semester because they didn't like where they started out the first time and they transferred. And typically when you transfer, the credits from school A or the first school don't all typically transfer to school B, the second school, and this can oftentimes result in extra time to get that degree and graduate. So going back to my comment about financial aid is not the only key factor in keeping the family's costs down. It is important to focus on doing everything possible to make sure we get done and out in the right number of years as it is picking a school and understanding financial aid. What are some of the biggest concerns that we hear from parents? Well, parents are afraid of missing deadlines. They're concerned they're going to make mistakes. They don't know how to develop a plan to pay for college. They have not enough time maybe to get everything involved, or they're concerned they won't have enough time. They're concerned that they're going to do something that will hurt their child's chances of getting into a college, or doing something that prevents them from getting the most aid possible, thus maybe making some colleges that are a good fit out of reach financially. These are all valid concerns, and they need to be addressed, and we're hoping that we're going to start addressing some of them with this program. Now, a couple of key tips that I want everybody to remember is it's important to determine who will find or make the time to figure things out and do what must be done. The college application and admission process is not something that you can pick a weekend, lock yourself up in the public library or in your study at home and say, I'm going to do it and be done with it. It's a process. It can't be done in just one weekend. Likewise, you can't just pick a weekend and say you're going to get through the whole financial aid process in one weekend. And also, you have to apply for financial aid each and every year, unlike the college admission process where you hopefully apply once to several schools, get accepted to a few, and go off to college. You do that once, hopefully. And if you do it once, you're increasing the odds of not overpaying for college. But with financial aid, you do have to apply for financial aid each and every year. A big question that needs to be answered early on is which comes first, the chicken or the egg? All too often, we have families coming in to talk to us, and the focus of the questions and all of the concern and interest is zoning in on, well, we don't know where they should apply. We don't know what they should study. We don't know how to apply. When should we apply? These are all good questions, and they need to be answered. But very few times are we getting the questions, we don't know how we're going to pay for college. So the question becomes, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Should we be focusing first on getting in and then worrying about how to pay? I believe it's more important to try to identify early on, before a lot of time and energy is put towards this monumental task. We need to focus on what we think we can reasonably afford. And I'm going to give an analogy that I often use because I think it kind of brings this point home. That analogy is this. When you go to buy your first house, or when you bought your first house, did you immediately go out to the $1 million plus neighborhoods and start shopping for a house that was $1 million or more? The answer for most people is absolutely not. The answer for most people is they typically are going to talk to a bank or a mortgage person, and they're going to try to identify how much of a mortgage they can qualify for. And once we know how much of a mortgage we can qualify for, and we take into consideration how much money we may already have for a down payment, now we know how much house we can actually afford. And this range of affordability then triggers the rest of the home search. Unfortunately, this is how families get fouled up with college. They do it in reverse order and then are scrambling and in a bad spot later. So it's real important to remember it's not just about getting them into college, it's also about getting them out, and most importantly, getting them out and being able to retire in the case of the parents, and getting out and having the kids not resent where they went to college because 15, 20 years after they graduated, although they may have been the best 4 years of their life while they were in college, they're not so happy that they're still paying down student debt 15, 20 years after they graduated. So one of the big questions is, how is a family going to pay for college? Well, there are only so many real answers or sources to pay for college, and I'm going to actually go with the quickest ones first, and that's at the bottom, not go at all. I do believe college is extremely important to give your kids every opportunity possible to do well in their life after college. However, college, or the traditional four-year college route, is not for everyone. You have to know your own child. There are some kids that never were a good student, never will be a good student. However, they may have other talents. They may be very creative. They might like working with things or building things. So maybe going right from high school to a traditional four-year college path is not the best thing for that type of student. Maybe a vocation or a trade or something along those lines might make more sense. Now, that's typically the exception. So let's go up to the comment about going to a lesser school. If I were to poll everyone on this webinar, what do you think I mean by lesser school? I know for a fact, because we've done this in live sessions, that we're going to get a few different answers. Some people are going to say, well, lesser school means it costs less. Some people are going to think a lesser school means it's not as good of a school. The reality is, it's not so much a function of which school is better than another. The key is finding the right fit school for your child. The school that has everything that they're looking for based on size and distance from home and areas of study and all of these other factors are extremely important towards answering the question of the right fit school. To give you a quick example of how getting a little too focused on the name of the school or a certain type of school can backfire. We had a family come into us years ago after their student had already applied to and gotten into and attended a semester at a very good school in New York. The daughter, for many years, thought she might want to pursue law as a career. Well, as the family who was in New Jersey was starting to look at schools that would be good undergraduate stepping stones to move on afterwards to law school, one of the schools that came up was Fordham. Now, Fordham has a great undergraduate program, and certainly you've got Fordham Law. Can't go wrong there, right? Well, not so. They were so honed in on focused on where this child should go and which schools had the better reputation that nobody gave any credibility to the fact that as this girl was growing up, from the time that she was a little girl, whenever the family went into New York City, whether it was to see the holiday lights or see a play or a show or whatever else they were going into the city for, this girl was a wreck. The big city scared her. It was overwhelming to her. And even with mommy and daddy holding her hand, every time she went into the city, it was an uneasy experience for her. So was going off to college at Fordham in New York City the best fit for her? It wasn't. She barely made it through one semester before she was looking to transfer to another school. So hopefully this makes a point. Now, let's talk about scholarships, because I'm sure everybody on this webinar is wanting to learn about scholarships. And we're going to talk about scholarships. There are two different types of scholarships. There's merit-based scholarships, which typically come from the schools. And there are individual private scholarships, which the student finds on their own through different sources. They apply, and hopefully they're going to get some money. Well, of all of the money out there to help pay for college, over $100 million to help pay for college last year, only about 3 or 4% of the money that helped pay for college came from the private scholarships. the ones that you are pursuing and trying to get outside of the financial aid process. For example, you go to the high school guidance office, they may be familiar with some scholarships. They may even have the applications in the office. The local Rotary, Elks, Chambers of Commerce, they oftentimes give out scholarships. These are things that you apply for and find on your own, and hopefully you're going to get something. The problem is, although there are many of these scholarships out there, most of them are not in very big denominations. So you might be applying for a scholarship that's $500 or $750, maybe $1,000. Every little bit helps, but the problem is you're going to have to string together an awful lot of these scholarships to make a big dent in the overall cost of college. So we want to make sure that we're using our limited time wisely and focusing on the bigger pieces of the pie. All right? A lot of time and energy can be spent on these scholarships, and in some cases, not much fruit will come from the labor. Now, later on, we'll talk a little bit more detail about the other type of scholarships, being the merit scholarships from the schools directly. Those are where you should spend some time and energy focusing. So that leaves us with savings and borrowing to pay for college. I'd be willing to bet that everybody on this webinar is participating right now because they don't have $200,000 sitting in a college account ready to pay for all of the college costs for all of the years for all of their kids. So the reality is most people are not going to be able to cover all of college just from savings. And if that is the case, then we are left with borrowing. Now, a lot of times families come into our office for a free evaluation of their circumstances, and when I ask them what their plan is to pay for college, oftentimes I'll get answers like, well, we don't really know, Chuck, that's why we're here. Or, well, we definitely don't have enough saved, Chuck, so I guess we're going to have to borrow. Well, the reality is there are a lot of loan options out there to help get a child through college. There are student loans, there are parent loans, there are federal loans, state loans, private student loans. There are options out there. But the problem is, knowing that there are loans available to help pay for college, that alone is not a plan. Because loans have to be paid back. And it needs to be addressed very early on that if a family is struggling to come up with an extra $100, $200, $300, $400 a month before college to save more for college, we need to be realistic and identify what's going to change, who's going to get a better job, who's going to get a job, who's going to get a part-time job on top of their full-time job. Where is the extra money every month going to come from to help pay off those loans when the loan payments begin? Now, yes, you can defer loan payments in some cases until after the student graduates, but the reality is there will come a day where a monthly payment is due. Okay? So borrowing or loans may be part of the solution, but they are not a plan in and of themselves. The other thing is it's really important that you do your homework about the different types of loans in advance. You don't wait until you get your financial aid award letters from the colleges, typically in April of the senior year of high school. You don't wait until April to find out how much or how little aid you are getting and how much or how little you owe as a balance. Because you're going to have to come up with the first semester tuition payment a few months after you're finding out what that picture looks like. it's not good to be scrambling to figure out which loans are the best to take when you don't have that much time to do a good job of figuring it out. So it doesn't matter how much you're going to have to borrow. Identify whether or not you think you will have to borrow something to get your kids through college, and do the research up front so that you are aware of the options, and then when the time comes, you're just going back and double checking to see if any major changes have occurred with those options, and you can make an intelligent decision. So with savings, before we move on to the next slide, with savings, it's really important to understand if you do have savings, whether it's the student's savings or money or the parent's savings or money, it's very important to identify early on, well before you're going to be applying for financial aid, how those savings and investments for college and those savings and investments that are not earmarked for college, how they will impact your financial aid picture. A little bit about scholarship scams. I'm going to let you read this because you can probably read it as quickly or quicker than I can read it out loud. In summary, while you're reading this, you really should not pay anyone any money to help you find scholarships. It's not necessary. You can find them on your own, but like I said earlier, it can take up a lot of time to find scholarships that will add up to a lot of money. So keep that in mind in terms of scholarships. Now, let's talk a little bit about financial aid. First off, who is eligible? There are definitely some myths and some realities that we need to talk about. One myth is that families feel, my income is too high, nobody's going to help us. Or families have a neighbor or a relative who has older kids that have been through this, and they kind of assume, well, I think we make the same amount of money, so if I didn't get any aid, then you're not going to get any aid. That's not necessarily true. You need to be careful that you're not making assumptions or letting other people make assumptions for you. You really need to understand how all of this works and figure it out for you. Other people are not you, you're not them. All right? Grades are too low. That's another assumption that some people will make. Well, the reality is there's two forms of financial aid. There's need-based financial aid, which has nothing to do with grades, and it has everything to do with your finances. Then there is merit-based aid that typically comes from the colleges, and that has a lot more to do with the students' grades and who they are and their extracurricular activities, etc. Has a lot more to do with grades and whatnot for merit aid, but your finances don't really come into play for merit-based aid. I've also heard over the years, if somebody owns a nice big home, there's no way they're going to get any financial aid. Well, that's less than 50% true, and I can prove it to you. Because the main financial aid form, called the FAFSA form, doesn't ask any information about your home. So if the form that drives the calculations to determine whether you're eligible for aid or not doesn't ask anything about the home, how can the home, the primary home, have any impact on your eligibility for aid? It can't. And the majority of schools use the FAFSA form. In fact, I should say all of the schools use the FAFSA form for identifying a family's eligibility for federal and state money. Okay? Now, there is another form used by a much smaller percentage of the private schools to only identify how much of the school's money you might get. It's called the CSS profile form, and it's more involved than the FAFSA form, and it does ask about the home. So the home could have an impact on a small percentage of the schools, but for the majority of the schools, that is a myth. Aid is only for special groups. That's not necessarily so, although there is some money for special groups. it's an easy process. Well, like I said, you can't just lock yourself up for a day or a weekend and be done with this. You have to apply for aid each and every year. We know for a fact that we get calls all of the time, every year, at the time that these forms should be completed, with families and parents in a panic saying, can you do these forms? We don't know what we're doing. Okay? So the forms can be overwhelming. You want to make sure that you're getting them done accurately, getting them done on time, so that any delays or incomplete or errors can't cost you money. And the other question is, the school people can help. The reality is they can, but only to a certain degree, and probably not the degree that most people feel they would like some help. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But the bottom line real shortly is the high school guidance people could know more than I know about this. They just don't have the time to help every family they're responsible for to the degree that might be necessary. The national average is something like 270 children or students per individual guidance counselor. That's too many people to be responsible for and then be able to get into the details of helping a family through the whole financial aid process. So it's not their fault per se, it's just, from a time standpoint, impossible for them to devote that type of time and help. And then we can talk about the college financial aid offices and the degree that they can help or will help a little bit later. Now, how do they determine if you are eligible for financial aid? Remember, there are two types of financial aid. There is need-based financial aid, which has everything to do with your finances and not really anything to do with the grades and the test scores. And then there is merit-based aid, which works the opposite way. Let's talk about need-based aid. The formula in its most basic format is the cost of attendance minus the family contribution equals your need. Okay? Once a need is identified, then everything happens from there at the school level to determine how much of a financial aid package you are going to get and in what forms will your aid come. Free money versus loans that you have to pay back. Now, it's important to make sure when you're talking about the cost of attendance that you are capturing the full cost of attendance, which should include tuition, books, room and board, student fees, maybe parking fees, transportation to and from school during breaks. All of these things are included and built into the full cost of attendance at each school. Now, a lot of times some of these might be estimates. So, for example, the travel cost is an estimate for all of the kids that might be coming from all different directions and distances for that school. So you have to use your logic, and if you live close to a school, your travel component may not be quite as large as the average that's being used for all of the students. But make sure you're using the full cost of attendance. A lot of families, as they're going into this, think that the cost of the books is included in the tuition. That is not true. Books are broken out on their own, and unless you're doing everything online or everything used, you're doing very well if you can get a year's worth of books for $1,000 or less. All right. Now we focus on what does the family contribution stand for, what makes up or drives the family contribution. This is based on the parents and the students' finances. They look at the parents and the students' income. They look at the parents and students' assets, the ages and number of family members, how many family members are going to be in college that year. When we take the cost of attendance minus the family contribution, that equals your need. And you must understand that your need number is only what you as a family are eligible to receive in aid. It is not a guarantee that you will get all of that need met with free money. And we will go through some examples a little bit later that will help bring this point home. Where are we going to get the money? Well, there are different sources. You've got the federal government, things like a Pell Grant, a CEOG grant, college work study. You have the subsidized and unsubsidized Stafford student loans. You have the federal Perkins loan, again, a student loan. And then you have the federal Parent Plus and SLS loans. The bottom line is the government of the United States is not in very good shape financially. So we should not be holding our breath that a ton of free money to help pay for college is going to come from the federal government. For example, the first two items here, the Pell Grants and the CEOG grants, they are only going to go to the most needy families that will qualify for them. So although people will hear that there's a lot of money out there, what we need to make sure we're doing is early on trying to identify how much of that money is really likely to come our way. We don't want unpleasant surprises at the last minute. Now, let's talk about students having some skin in the game, or else. Or else what, Chuck? Well, I firmly believe that every student, even if a family does have $200,000, $300,000 in a college account, I firmly believe every family should have a talk with their student or students and let them know whether they graduate on time or not, whether it takes 4.5, 5 years, or 4 years, whether they never graduate, whether they transfer and then graduate. I think they should know going in that they will be responsible for some minimum amount of the college cost. If you don't have that conversation, this is more likely to possibly happen. Now, having said that, if they do go off to college, they do their job and keep up their end of the bargain, they keep their grades up, they get done in 4, not 5 years, okay? If you can pay off their student loans or their portion for them as a graduation present, nobody cares who writes the check to pay off these loans. So once they do their part, don't tell them this going into this, but if you want to and you can pay off some of their loans for them as a reward and still feel like you can retire when and how you'd like to retire, knock yourself out. No problem with that. Where are we going to get the money? Well, we talked about the federal government, state government, similarly, not as many options depending on your state, and you have to look at the financial condition of your own state. I know New Jersey doesn't have much more money or isn't much better off, maybe worse off than the federal government. Who really knows? The point is, I wouldn't count on the state of New Jersey being my solution to help my kid get through college. All right. Then we get down to colleges and universities. This is where we can make some hay and hopefully bring our out-of-pocket as a family down. One thing that is extremely important is never eliminate options for your student based on incorrect assumptions. So, for example, if you know it's going to be tough because you have more than one student to send to college, you should never, ever say, well, we can only apply to state schools because they're less expensive. Not necessarily true. And again, as we go through this, you'll understand why I'm saying this. Private universities tend to have larger endowment funds outside of what federal or state funds might be available. State or public colleges tend to rely more heavily on federal and state funds. So what did we just establish in terms of the probability of the federal and state governments giving out a bunch of free money to help your kid get through college? Not great. All right. A lot of the school's money will be awarded on a first-come, first-served basis. So it is very important to make sure we're aware of deadlines and we're doing what we need to do to be at the front of the line. And lastly, colleges, when it is their money, they get to decide who gets what and how much. So they may give preferential packaging to students who are in the top 25% of all applicants that year, or of all kids that are attending that year. So it's important to find the right fit school, but in so doing, in our searching, we want to try to identify schools that have everything that the student and the parents are looking at. But hopefully, some of those will be schools where our student falls within the top 25% of the incoming accepted students. Now, how do you determine if your student is in the top 25%? Is it based on GPA? Is it based, how do they determine that? Well, it's pretty simple. There's not a lot of time for the families to get through all this. There's also not a lot of time for the schools to get through this whole process of financial aid. So as a result, the colleges need a quick down and dirty test to narrow down the number of families that they're going to consider for their money, school money. And the method that is the quickest and the easiest is often looking at the SAT or ACT test scores. If a child's critical reading and math scores are not in the top 25% of that school's middle 50% test score, if you're not in the top 25%, you should not hold your breath expecting a school to throw a lot of their own free money your way. It's their money. It's like free agency in sports. They can spend it on whomever they want. All right? Now, there's an exception to every rule, and I can't say definitively that if your child is a little bit below the 25% on the test scores that they will not get merit-based aid, but in planning, you have to be ready to pay the worst-case scenario and hope that it turns out better. And you don't want to go into this saying, well, just because Johnny or Mary has straight A's in high school, they're going to get a ton of money. Believe it or not, whether it's fair or not, it's almost out of necessity and timing. There are a lot of straight A students that just don't test that well, that could be thrown out with the bathwater and not even make that first cut of consideration because their test scores don't put them in the top 25%. This is extremely important to understand and keep that in mind. Now, last of the sources are private sources. We talked already about how little of the overall cost comes from private scholarships like the Chamber of Commerce, the Rotary, the Elks, etc. Okay? You have to be careful you're not spending a lot of your time looking for breadcrumbs. You want to focus on the bigger pieces of the pie. Next item on the agenda here is how do you actually apply for aid? Well, we talked a little bit about the FAFSA form. Don't worry quite so much what FAFSA stands for. It's the free application for federal student aid. Everybody refers to this form as the FAFSA. There is also the CSS profile form, okay? And this is the form that I talked about that is pretty much exactly like the FAFSA in terms of the questions asked, plus several other details that are not asked on the FAFSA form. This form is only required by a select few private schools. So depending on where your student ultimately applies for admission, you may or may not have to fill out the CSS profile form. Also, there are some schools out there that may have their own institutional or their own college financial aid form. What kills me about this is there's the potential that some families might have to fill out 3 different forms, possibly or likely at 3 different times during the year, and for the most part they all ask the same information. To me, I honestly think this is just something that is done as a form of looking to rule out some families that throw up their hands and say, I already provided this information on the FAFSA form. I'm sick of these forms and I'm not doing anymore. Well, guess what? If you want the school's money, you have to do what they ask you to do. All right? The other important thing to understand about the FAFSA especially, but it's true if any other forms are required by a school, but you must understand that even if you feel you will not qualify for need-based aid, and even if you end up being correct about your assumption, or if you learn how to verify that you definitely will not qualify for need-based aid, however you get to that point, I'm going to say that you should still be filling out the FAFSA form for 2 main reasons. Number 1, if you want your student to have some skin in the game going in, the most favorable student loans will require the FAFSA to be completed, or you will not have them as an option. Secondly, if your student is awarded merit-based scholarships or grants from a school out of the school's pocket, a lot of times, although they will tell you they are offering your child a $5,000 or a $10,000 scholarship, they will not actually honor that offer if the financial aid form or forms are not completed. So you better have all of the money set aside if you're going to assume I don't need to or I don't want to fill out the financial aid forms. Also, if you own a business or are divorced or separated, these are additional forms that will likely come into play in this process. Are we now understanding how this may not be quite so simple, and we certainly probably cannot just get it all banged out in one day or one weekend? Now we want to start talking about which schools are going to give us the best shot of getting money to make school more affordable. And the things that we need to identify and understand is what percentage of the family's need for aid will each school typically meet. All right? Cost of attendance minus the family contribution will equal your need for aid. Once you identify whether or not you have a need, some schools only meet 50% of your need. That's 50% that they're not going to meet. Some schools meet 100% of your need. But you can't stop there, because then we have to look at, of the aid that they do meet, or of the need that they do meet with aid, what percentage of the financial award package from that school is going to be gift aid or free money in the form of scholarships and grants that never have to be paid back? And likewise, what percentage of the aid is going to be self-help or loans? It's really important to know this information as early on as possible, preferably before you even apply to go to a college, okay? Because if a school doesn't meet much of your need, and most of the aid that they're going to give you is in the form of loans that have to be paid back, you're going to be close to paying 100% of the sticker price in that situation. Now, we'll run through an example a little bit later of looking at these things that we're talking about right here. Percentage of need met, how much is free money, how much is loans. And let's look at this case study. We've got School A that costs $40,000 a year. And we have School B that costs $20,000 a year. Your family contribution, when you fill out the FAFSA, or if you learn how to calculate it in advance of doing the FAFSA form, your family contribution is going to be the same no matter where your child applies and ultimately goes to school. Okay? So where they go doesn't change your family contribution. And if you remember the formula, it's the cost of attendance minus the family contribution equals your need. Well, School A has a much larger need than School B. And if we go down this page, we can see that School A typically meets 100% of the family's need, and most of that aid that they're going to give is free money. Doesn't have to be paid back. Let's swap over to School B. They only typically meet 60% of the family's need. So immediately they're leaving this family in this situation $2,000 short. And of the aid that they do give, half of it is going to be loans that have to be paid back. So we need to translate all of this down to what you as a family would actually pay at each school your student is applying to. In School A's situation, okay, the family only pays about $1,500 more out of their pocket to send their child to the quote, more expensive school, the school with the sticker price that is twice as much as School B. So don't make the huge mistake of picking schools based on cost of attendance only, because it is possible, if we find the right fit, it is possible for a much more expensive school at the sticker level to be no more, a little bit more, or maybe even a little bit less than that lower sticker price college that you think is the one that's only available to you. Your family may not get the best education because you didn't know the inside secrets of college funding and how aid works. Now, another big thing to understand in this whole process is you can appeal the financial awards that you get back from the colleges. And the reality is some schools miss award because there was a mistake made. Some schools might intentionally under-award a family with the initial award. And some schools will try to compete with each other or compete with other schools. You need to know whether or not to accept the first award letter that you get, and you must know how to talk to these people in the financial aid offices so that you don't come across as another whining parent saying, we really want to come here, but we need more money, because the financial aid people are hearing that all day long, and they'll tune you out pretty quickly. Okay, very important to understand. I believe that the main goal of every college's financial aid office is to get full enrollment. That means filling every dorm bed that they have capacity for, filling every classroom seat that they have capacity for, but give out as little of their own money as possible. And here's why. Because if they get full enrollment and they give out $100,000 less than they thought they might have to give out going into that school year, they're going to be doing a happy dance. Because now they can take that $100,000 that they didn't give out in aid, and they can start that landscaping rejuvenation project at the main entrance to the campus, so that the next class of students, when they start coming to visit to see whether they'd like to go to that school, are blown away by their first impression, and that landscaping is done a year earlier than maybe they were planning on doing it, all because they got full enrollment and didn't have to give out quite as much money as they had budgeted or planned to. So for example, with the appeal process, let's look at a family with where we have the original offer on the left and the adjusted offer on the right. All right. You will see that on the left in the original offer, right out of the gate, the school was leaving the family with $4,500 of unmet need. Those are dollars that are going to translate right down to the family. Okay? When we look at the right side, the adjusted offer, the school ended up meeting 100% of the family's need. And interestingly enough, when you look at the university grant on both sides, that grant doubled from $2,000 to $4,000. And on the right-hand side, there's a scholar award of $1,000 that was never even offered originally. So there's $3,000 of free money right there, possibly times 4 years, or $12,000 that was picked up as a result of knowing that you can appeal and knowing whether you should appeal and how to effectively appeal. This does not mean that you should appeal every award from every school. It means you need to learn how to identify first, should you and do you have a basis to appeal, and then do it effectively. How to get more need-based aid for college. As we said in the beginning, we'll reiterate here, you have to do your college planning well in advance of when you're actually going to be applying for financial aid. And with recent changes to the process, starting with the school year that starts fall of 2017, the lead time to do proper planning has been moved even further backwards in time or earlier in the high school years to have the most impact possible. Okay? We used to say that to have the greatest impact possible, you would want to identify what changes you can possibly make in your finances prior to January of the junior year in high school. Now with the changes that are coming up starting in school year 2017-18, we need to do and start our planning prior to October 1st of the junior year in high school. It's very important that you don't procrastinate with your planning. Similar to accountants or CPAs that are paid by some people to handle their taxes, they are typically paid to do the taxes for someone because they know the tax code better than anyone else. That's their life, that's their living, okay? And the reality is there are loopholes in the tax code that opens up opportunities to take advantage of deductions and credits and whatnot that are legally and ethically there to be taken by those people that know and understand the tax code. We need to understand also that there are loopholes in the whole financial aid process. It is not cheating, it is understanding the rules and how the game is played and playing it in the most efficient way possible. Here is an example of two different families. One took control and the other one just kind of muddled through the whole process. Now, to make it simple, we only looked at a couple of pieces of information, but the bottom line is we're taking two families that look identical financially. In fact, they look identical in terms of the number of people in the family and the number of kids that will be in school at the same time. Income's the same, assets are the same, everything is the same, but the approach that these families took. So family A, because they just went through the process and didn't do any pre-planning, their family contribution was $18,185. Whereas family B, they got started early. They learned or found somebody to help them understand the rules of the game and how to play it, and they were able to make some changes legally and ethically well enough in advance so that when they filled out their financial aid form, their family contribution was about half of family A, $9,000 versus $18,000. Okay? This is all because one family understood the puzzle, took control, and figured out how to play this game. Now, can every family have an impact of $9,000 and reduce their family contribution by $9,000? No. But the reality is you need to understand that that potential may exist, and you need to know how to figure out what impact you can have. Having said that, similarly to saying earlier that knowing that you could take loans to help pay for college is not a plan, it's an option and it's a piece of the puzzle to pay. But if you can't afford the monthly payments on the loans, then it's not a solution. Similarly here, learning how to lower your family contribution and therefore increase your eligibility for aid is not a plan. It's a small piece to make it turn out as good as possible. But the reality is, for most people, if they started out with a family contribution with no changes being made of $40,000, and it was determined that if they did make some changes, they could lower their family contribution to $30,000. That's a $10,000 reduction in the family contribution. The reality is, for most families, coming up with $30,000 a year times 4 years times how many kids they have is going to be almost as hard as coming up with $40,000 a year times 4 years times the number of kids they have. So although that is an improvement, the challenge of how will we pay our out-of-pocket still typically remains great. I want to make sure that everybody understands that a big part of coming out on the other side of college is managing expectations. That's managing the expectations of the student, managing the expectations of the parents. There are 36,000 high schools in this country. Not all 36,000 valedictorians can go to Georgetown or Harvard. Nor do these schools want nothing but all of the valedictorians they can get, okay? All of the Ivy Leagues and a lot of the other schools, they have more than just classrooms. They have fields and facilities for the student body to use, whether it's for team sports, college teams, or intramural sports. They have music departments. They have art departments. They have equipment that they want people to come and use. And what good is it to have a music department if they're not attracting a certain number of kids every year that are going to be involved with music? Okay? The other thing that we need to understand is less can be more. Be very careful you don't turn your child into a serial joiner of every extracurricular activity they can find in high school. Less can sometimes be more. Okay? Think about whether the schools are really going to put value in some of the things that are on their cheat sheet, their brag sheet, or their resume. Being a leader, a captain, an officer of a team or a club, or better yet, being a founding member of a new organization or club in your community or within your high school is going to have a lot more weight and importance to a college admission officer than somebody that signs up for every single club they can find under the sun. Okay? So you have to ask yourself, where is the value? Now, depending on where you guys are at, You might start receiving mail from colleges directly, but you're also possibly going to get mail from other organizations and sources. You might get invitations saying that you're invited or selected, or your kid is eligible to be recognized, or they qualify for something. All right? You might see invitations or qualifications for the National Society of blah, blah, blah. You might get an invitation to a leadership program in Washington, D.C., okay? The question that you have to ask before you just jump on signing up for yet another thing because you think the more you have, the better, why was your student accepted or invited? Why do they qualify? And the answer oftentimes is because your zip code. They knew you could or would pay a small fee to get your kid on this list or into this program. They knew that you would fill out a form and send in a check. All right? Now, I'm not saying that the leadership program in Washington, D.C. is a bad thing or something that you shouldn't do. But before you do some of these things, pick any college. It doesn't have to be a school that you really think your kid's going to apply to yet, especially if they haven't really narrowed down their list. But just call up the admissions office and ask them, do you put any credibility or importance behind the Washington, D.C. leadership program? They have no reason to lie to you and tell you, yes, we do, if they don't really consider it that much, or vice versa. So understand that you want to try to identify, is there true value before you spend the time, energy, and money to get involved in something. Now, having said that, even if a school does say, we don't really care that much about that Washington, D.C. leadership program, the reality is it may still be a good thing to do. Why? Because your kid is probably going to walk away with some value from that. And if nothing else, maybe it becomes the topic for their college admission essay. So when they apply to colleges, a lot of times they're going to have to write an essay. Well, maybe something like this could become the topic of their essay, and there would be value there. Not so much that just because they went there, you can't think of these things as, the Willy Wonka golden ticket into Charlie's factory, into the Willy Wonka factory. All right? It's not a free ticket into all the schools that you want to go to. Now, a lot of this information was taken from an old Washington Post article by George F. Will. So we need to understand now, can't the colleges or high school guidance counselors help us with all this? And I kind of talked about the high school guidance counselors earlier on. There's just not enough time for them to devote to every single family that they're responsible for. But let's talk also about the college financial aid people. If they're asking you to fill out all these forms, why can't they help you? And in theory, yes, they should be able to help you, but theory is sometimes different than reality. And let's talk about what we mean by this. They should be able to help you, but, they may not have the time. All right? That's number one. Number two is, if you were to go to the IRS, many people don't know this, but if you go to the IRS, they'll do your taxes for you for free. All right? The problem is not many people will take the IRS up on that offer. It's free. You can't do better than that. But most people are wise enough to understand that the IRS is not going to do my taxes for me for free, and when doing them, they're not going to give me every deduction and every credit possible so that I pay them, the IRS, less in taxes. It's a conflict. It's not going to happen. So asking the financial aid officers at the colleges, hey, can you tell me what forms I need to fill out? Sure. Well, these are the forms we need. These are our deadlines. Here's where you go get the form. They're going to help you out there. But if you start asking questions, hey, what should I do before I fill out these forms, a year or two before I'm going to be filling out these forms? What should I do so that I'm going to show a greater need and you're going to possibly give me more money. Asking the colleges to tell you everything that you should do so that they'll feel like they have to give you more money is like going to the IRS and expecting them to do your tax return for you for free and make sure that you pay them less in taxes. So hopefully that's something that you understand. Now, if anyone tells you that they can help you, you want to ask them at a minimum these questions. Can you show me how to lower my expected family contribution and maximize my eligibility for aid? That's very important, but remember, that alone is not the plan to pay for college, okay? You're still probably going to have to come up with a number times 4 years or more that's bigger than what you were thinking or hoping you would have to come up with. Can you help me pick schools that will give me the best aid packages, meet most of my need with more merit-free money and less loans? Can you help me fill out the financial aid forms that may be required? For certain, it will be the FAFSA form and possibly others. Will you help me appeal if I get a bad package or less than I expected from each school? Well, first of all, somebody needs to make sure we know whether we got a good package in the first place or a bad package in the first place. And then we need to know how to effectively present our case so that the school may be willing to adjust it and make your award more favorable. Can you show me how to pay for college on a tax-favored basis even if I don't qualify for need-based financial aid? Can you help me identify the right fit school so my student is not going to want to transfer, adding at least probably one extra semester and thousands of dollars to our price for college? These are all important things that you either need to be able to navigate through yourself, or if you are going to get some help, you want to make sure these people that are helping you can do these things at a minimum. So what are your options? Well, you can keep moving forward and do this on your own, okay? Another option that you have is to try to find some help. Now, what you have available to you is the fact that this webinar actually, which didn't cost you any money, this webinar actually could be part one of a two-part program available to you. So, for example, part one, we covered a lot of information on this webinar that every family should be familiar with, and it's going to help everybody move forward down the path. However, what we were not able to do in this type of a format is to get into the details for each family on this call and talk specifically about how to translate the things that we talked about to their personal family situation. Okay? So one of the things that I would encourage people to do is to take advantage of a free analysis or a free evaluation so that we can help you translate the things we talked about here into reality for your family's circumstances, okay? So that you know what your family contribution is, so that you know what the financial aid awards might look like from some of the schools that may be considered by your child or children. So if this is something that is of interest, because this is a webinar and we are not together in person, you can't check off a box or fill out an evaluation form. What I would encourage you to do is to reach out to our office by calling 732-224-1496, or you can email us at info, at collegefundingassociates.com, just like it sounds, collegefundingassociates.com, and let us know that you participated in the webinar and you want to take advantage of that free Part 2 analysis to translate some of what we covered to your personal situation. All right. Aside from that, I want to thank everybody for participating and wish everybody luck as they move forward. Remember, we are here to help families save time, save money and reduce the stress that comes with getting their kids into and through college and still being in a financial position where retirement is not so far of a stretch. So thank you and good luck, and we really appreciate your participation.